Hello, welcome to the Snap Wednesday webinar. My name is Sally Britton and I run Snap Care. And we are delighted to have Lydia Dunford from Boys Turner back with us for another webinar on education healthcare plans. Lydia was kind enough to do several webinars last year for us, and they were all very popular. And I think this one is just the same. We have lots of people who have joined us today. So without further ado, I will pass you over to Lydia, and we're going to go through a series of questions and answers, and there will be an opportunity to ask more questions at the end of the session. Thank you. Over to you, Lydia.
Oh, thanks. Yeah, I'm Lydia Dunford. I'm one of the solicitors at Boys Turner in our SEN education team. And yeah, these webinars are always a really fun thing to do. Always get lots of interesting questions. Yes, this webinar is about transition reviews of EHCPs. We're coming up to that time of year when transition reviews are going to be happening for EHCP, so it seemed like a good time to have a run through about what to expect. And there are some questions, I think, Sally, that you're going to ask me and I will do my best to answer.
Yes. So, what are transition reviews?
So they're a form of annual review of an EHCP. They're meant to be reviewed annually, as the name suggests. Transition reviews are a form of review that take place ahead of a child or young person transitioning to the next stage of education. So you've got from nursery to primary, infant to junior, junior to secondary, or secondary to post-16 are some of the kind of common examples you might get. The point of them is to consider the EHCP as you would at any other annual review, but specifically ahead of that transition to that next placement, so to make sure the plan's up to date, are any changes needed. They're also the time for parents or young person, the school or college or experts involved, and local authority to put forward their views on the potential next placement options, whatever they may be.
When do transition reviews need to take place then?
So there's two deadlines to be aware of. They need, well, as the deadlines are more to do actually where the decision for the review needs to have happened. When they take place, there's no set point when they need to take place by, but they need to happen at some point during the autumn term of, say, for example, a child's year 6 year, before they go to year 7 the following September. The reason that they should happen in the autumn term is because if it's any later than that, oh, there's some echoing coming from somewhere. I'm not sure where that's coming from. I can just hear myself echoing on someone.
There's a few more people that are just joining. If you could please stay on mute and turn your videos on.
That's what it is.
It makes it better in terms of any feedback.
Yeah.
If you could maybe just do that on one's behalf.
Yeah, that's better. It's not echoing now. Yes, so if transition reviews don't happen within the autumn term, the year before the transition is going to happen, you risk running out of time to potentially appeal that decision to the independent SEND tribunal. So you really need to plan ahead of that autumn term before the transition. That's why preparing in advance and not waiting to the autumn annual transition review is really important.
Lydia, can I jump in there with a question?
Of course you can.
Just come up through, thanks Jessica. What happens where a child is in year 6, but we are currently in a process of appeal? Tribunal date is early March. Our last AR was June last year, 2021.
Okay, so I'm presuming the appeal is about secondary placement, I would guess, if the child's already in year 6. If you're already appealing about secondary placement, then this appeal... Okay, no. Yeah. So the appeal's about the content rather than placement. So
tired or because he's dehydrated. Like at one point I changed his nappy at like 10 o'clock. At like,
I'm sorry, could everybody else please stay on mute because it's interrupting the recording?
That's better, thank you. So what should really happen is if you're in year 6 already, you should have had that transition review for the child to start in the coming September. So secondary placement should be on the card. So now would be the time to add in placement into the appeal, and you can do that through a request for change to say you want to change the scope of the appeal to talk about placement. So in theory that will happen and go through the motions. If you leave it until the next annual review in June to talk about secondary placement, you're leaving it, you won't have a decision probably until September, and that might not be the one you want. So any appeal, you're already going to be kind of behind, and September will have started. But it's one of those ones where it depends on the situation. So happy, drop me an email afterwards if you have, want to talk about it a bit more. That'll be fine. So yeah, legal deadlines then. This goes back to why the timings of that review is so important, and you want to do it earlier, because there are two deadlines to be aware of. Someone's asked about year 9 actually, and this ties in kind of sort of with that. 15th of February, the year that you are going to transition. So if a young person or child is going to transition to, say, secondary in the September, by the 15th of February, they need to have a final EHCP that names at least a type of placement for secondary, if not the name of it as well. That's what gives you the right of appeal. The 31st of March is the deadline only for post-16 transitions. All other types of transitions are under that 15th of February umbrella, so they're probably the one that most people will come across more often, is the 15th of February. But if you get to post-16, so you're in year 11, young person's in year 11, they're going to go to year 12 in September, then by the 31st of March, before they move, that's when you need to have that final plan naming post-16. Otherwise, if you're not in a transition year, so someone's asked about what about year 9, that's, as far as I'm aware, that's not a transition year, stage between secondary to post or primary to secondary. So that should be, as far as I'm aware, just a standard annual review timing whenever the last review was, not a transition review. Oh, there's a question that's just come in actually. I don't know if you want to read it out.
Is there a too early date for the transition review? For example, an LA conducting reviews in year 5 summer term for a year 6 to 7 transition?
I mean, it really, potentially it's not too early. Potentially it might be fine. I suppose it depends when the last review was. If you've not long had a review, then it might be too early to have one, say, a couple of months after. But if it's that early and everyone's ready for it and everyone already has an idea for what schools they want to put forward for year 7, then if you start it earlier, then in theory, if you have to go to an appeal, you've got, in theory, a longer time in which to appeal. So there might be a bit less pressure there. Yeah, it depends really. It depends how it kind of fits in. I don't think it's a bad thing necessarily. It just depends on the timings really.
Sorry, David has said, what about year 14? Question mark.
So year 14, that's post 18. Yes. I'm not aware there is one for post 18 transitions. So that would be a annual review as per previous annual reviews, rather than you are transitioning from 18, because some young people may not go into education past 18 anyway. You might be looking at that point, the local authority might start making noises about ceasing the plan, possibly. That might start happening. It may not, but sometimes that might start to happen around that age. Oh, there's quite a few
Yeah,
questions.
I'll just, if I could. My daughter is Andrea, thank you. My daughter is 17, 18 in May this year. She will go to college in September from post-16 secondary school. Is the 31st of March deadline? Is that, sorry, the 31st of March deadline?
So if she's
going to be 18 this year.
She's 18.
17, going to be 18 this year.
Yeah. So it depends if she's, because you might have it where a young person's educated a year behind. So there's a year behind and then they're going to post 16 when they're actually 17 years old rather than 16. But if your daughter's 18 already, if she's transitioning to a post 16 placement, but that seems like she's already past 16, is it really the way to look at it is, I suppose, is what year group is the young person in. If they're in year 11 now, then post 16 would be the following September. That'd be going into year 12, so that is post 16 education. If you're then annual reviews after that, they're not transition, they are just annual reviews that follow on, but you're at the post 16 placement already, if that makes sense. Like I say, I'm not aware that there's a transition for post 18, in comparison to post 16. So my understanding is it would be annual reviews as they have fallen before, basically.
Lydia, there are lots of questions. There's 16 questions there, so we will try and get through them, but please don't worry, there is a fact sheet. You can get hold of Lydia. Is that right,
Yes.
Lydia? You're happy to give out?
Sometimes these ones where they're easier to have a chat on the phone, because I know there's always a lot of background, a lot of things to think about. So after this, my email will be passed out, so if people want to contact me for a chat, then that's absolutely fine. But yeah, I'm conscious of getting through the basis of this so everyone knows what's what.
Yeah, we could think we're ignoring them.
If we go through the basics, and then when we've actually gone through this, because then this bit will be recorded, because then other people might want to watch it afterwards, and then we'll basically have an open Q&A and we can go through it, if that's okay. And then we can sort of see how many we can kind of get through at the end of it, because then it won't sort of stop from these questions and the basics, if that's all right with everybody.
No, that's fine. There was one more point actually about the deadlines for the reviews, the transition reviews. They are legal deadlines as well. They're not guidelines. They do need to happen by that point. They don't always, and often parents come to us and say they were due a decision from a transition review. It's been and gone, and weeks have passed. You can follow that up with the local authority, or we can on parents' behalf, to say, either risk a complaint, because you've missed this deadline, you're preventing an appeal if parents need to. Ultimately, you can even extend it further to a judicial review, which is saying the local authority has not done its legal duty and something has happened as a consequence, i.e. parents cannot appeal. Often, a kind of a strongly worded email can be enough to say you're late, just issue it, because parents need to appeal. But that's why it's so important to get your reviews in good time, rather than leaving it till January, February. That's far too late.
So what can parents or a young person do if they do not agree with the content of the amended final EHCP?
So, as per any other annual review decision, parents or young person would have a right of appeal to the same SEND tribunal, which is independent from the local authority. This is again why it's so important to get the reviews in on time, to get those decisions out by the 15th of February or 31st of March deadlines, is because once you then lodge an appeal with the tribunal, generally the timescales take about 3 months to conclude. And if you factor in that there's suddenly a lot of people coming in with transition appeals from February or end of March, the tribunal often at that point is very, very full incapacity, and you potentially may get hearings not until September, October sometimes, even if it's for transition appeals. I had a few earlier this year, and it was purely because the tribunal was just so busy. So getting an appeal in early is really, really important. And I suppose also planning for the worst case, that if there isn't resolved by September, do you have a plan for what your child or young person will do? You know, will they go to the school that's been named in the plan that you don't agree with, or will you keep them at home, or will you, if you're able to, fund the place that you want to, if that's something that's available? It's not ideal if that happens, but it can be a very real possibility. And we've had clients where that happened, where the timings are just out of your hands, unfortunately. So you do have to make these other arrangements and plan for it. So yeah, get in early, get an appeal early. You know, if you get a transition review decision in and you're not quite sure if you need to appeal, I'd always say get advice earlier on, rather than waiting the 2 months that you have to decide whether you want to appeal, because by that point you do risk running out of time to lodge an appeal before the summer, specifically because August is a month where the tribunals, as standard, don't have hearings. So if you don't get a hearing date before the end of July, realistically, you're not going to get one until the autumn. August hearings can happen very rarely if everyone, both, you know, parents and local authority, are kind of up for it and agree. But usually people are on holidays, tribunal's got to find its own capacity. It's often quite difficult to try and do that. So yeah, try and do it as early as possible, I would always say.
What if the local authority doesn't name a placement for such one?
So if they don't name a placement, they have to, as a minimum, name a type, which isn't always satisfactory, but legally they can do that. If they just name a type, and obviously you want a specific school named, then you can appeal that and say they've only named a type, they haven't named a school place. You want to appeal, that's fine. They can't leave section I blank in a final plan, that isn't lawful. So if they did that, that would be not only an appeal, but also something more formal to the local authority to say you actually need to name something. And if they do that, I suppose it depends on what parents or young person have in mind. If they've got a school or college, then you can push forward with it. If it's a case where this can also happen, where actually both parents and local authority are struggling to find something, then that can be a bit more difficult. It can involve experts, you know, assessments and being involved that way. It could involve a lot of potential research and visiting schools and just seeing what's out there, really. But if you get to September and there isn't a school either named or an appeal hasn't been resolved, remember that the local authority has a duty to make sure a child or young person is receiving a suitable education to meet their needs. So if it is, say, that parents have put forward a school, the local authority haven't agreed it, but they haven't decided on a school yet, then, you know, it's going to the local authority saying, well, what are you going to do from September if they can't start at the school that we want, you haven't agreed, appeal's not resolved. Child shouldn't be left at home with nothing. The difference to that is if, say, local authority does go through the appeal and they do come up with the school and parents say, no, we don't want that, we want ours, but the appeal isn't resolved by September, sometimes parents may say, well, we'll make our own arrangements then. We're not going to send our child to your school, we'll keep them at home and educate them until the appeal's resolved, perhaps, or, you know, we can fund the place, you know, ourselves. That is different. That if parents opt to do that, they are effectively relieving the local authority of their burden to educate that child through the EHCP. So there is a difference. So it's always something to bear in mind and get advice about if you're not sure about what the options are and what that legally means. But, you know, for a good number of appeals, you can get them resolved by September, which is great, and pupils can start with their peers, which is what the aim is, but it doesn't always happen. So you do have to be prepared for that it might not quite work out, and you might just get a really difficult local authority who just don't engage, or they're not receptive to your placement but they haven't got anything of their own, or they're suggesting something which is clearly unsuitable. But yeah, that's what the system is, unfortunately. But that's what the appeal is there for parents to use, and obviously we can help with that as much as parents may need us to as well, because it can get complicated and it can get very full on at times as well.
So that's the end of our sort of set questions. So, so Janet, do you want to just have a look at through the chat and just see if there's some other questions that we can answer? If that's all right with you?
No, that's fine. There were quite a few that came in. Actually, there was. I lost track. There were quite a few pinging up as I was speaking.
Yeah. I mean, I think some of them might be. I haven't looked at them because I can't see them on my screen, but some of them may be quite sort of individual kind of questions.
Yes. There's one here actually that says my little one has ASD, has autism and ADHD, but has a good IQ. Is there no hope for an EHCP? That really is a question which would involve a phone conversation. That's not something that I could answer. Definitely yes or definitely no. So yeah, say that's one to have a contact me afterwards about. Absolutely.
Great. There's a post-16 question, and we are looking at the end of a vocational course to another, for example, a supported apprenticeship course. Do the same post-16 deadlines apply?
Oh, so that's an interesting one. My understanding is the post-16 placement is when you are making that first transition from year 11 to year 12, or kind of equivalent. So the question is, if you're looking at the end of a vocational course to another, so
actually Janine said it's actually a post-18 question.
Oh, okay. Well, yeah, my understanding is that post-18 annual reviews happen annually. There isn't a transition for post-18, so it would be whenever the last annual review was, then the next review should happen within a year of that date. Like I said, I'm not aware there's a post-18 transition that is something to kind of be aware of.
There's also a year 13 going into college.
Again, not aware that there's. Oh yeah, I can see it there. Yeah, not aware there's a transition from year 13 to year 14, year 15. Whether that's because once a child or young person hits 18, they don't have to be in education anymore, because it was 6, it was staying in after 16 up to 18. Like I say, some young people at 18 they go into training or apprenticeships or something different rather than academic year 13, 14, 15, etc. But happy to have a chat with people who want to afterwards, to get a bit more information and about specifics, because I know there can be a lot to try and condense into a little question on a chat. Oh, there's another one.
There's one here. There's one from a Christelle. Hi, Christelle. We received a letter from the LA saying we agree that the EHCP needs updating. Does this cover them, or does the LA still need to update the plan by the deadline?
So the deadline, not quite sure what deadline you are referring to, because I can see if this is the year 13 going into college, and like I said, I don't think there's the transition dates apply. So if they're saying they agree it's need up, that one would be one probably to have a chat about, because if this is following an annual review and the LA has said we agree that the plan needs amendments, they have to have told you that within 4 weeks of the review date. But then there's this bit of this sort of vague period then legally, when actually there's no clear set times on how long they have to make those changes following a review. It's had a case. There was a case that was quite sort of big. It got it was in, I think it was Devon a few years ago, and it was challenging this particular point because it's this vague part in the legislation which doesn't quite say, it's about reasonably updating it, within reasonable time or reasonably quickly or something, which is very vague. So yeah, that's probably one to have a chat about, just to see what's going on there.
Yeah, I think all of them are. They're all so
Yeah,
complex.
more and more. Yeah.
I do have one more from Joe, which is what happens if
Hmm.
in the post 18 the annual review decision is outside of statutory deadline. Annual review is in March. It ceases to main decision given in December. Is the LA still responsible for provision whilst waiting for the appeal date if they are claiming that they have met outcomes? It's interesting.
Okay, right, yes. So this, cease to maintain is an interesting area. So I see. Oh, so the annual review was in March of last year. Blimey, then the decision to cease was in December. Gosh, yeah, that is late. Yeah, so that they should have decided that within 4 weeks of your review. So that's very late. But as long as you've got until your right of appeal expires or you go through an appeal and it is then completed, the local authority has to maintain the plan as it is until whichever one of those two happens. So either your appeal deadline runs out, you don't appeal, or you go through an appeal and you get a decision. Yes, the point about the young person's met outcomes, cease to maintain is something where I could talk separately about for ages because there's a lot to it. But if a young person has met their outcomes, that's not a definite that you should then cease a plan. It's one of quite a few factors that a local authority should consider. But as long as you're within your appeal deadline still, or you're in an appeal, then the local authority, they have to maintain their plan until the end. But again, that's something to talk about if you want a bit more information, because it can be a little bit complicated. There's quite a few. Someone else, can we? Yeah.
That's a very good idea.
Yes, I'm sure that'd be fine to do. Yeah. Right.
Gosh.
Yeah. Okay, so they're saying that he's been with no provision since July. So yeah, as long as you're not without you haven't missed your appeal deadline, which by the sounds of it you haven't. If they issued it in December, you get 2 months usually to appeal. So yes, provision should have been in place since September, absolutely. So that's something to follow up with, because that shouldn't have stopped. There's a couple of other questions. There's one here about an LA getting input from an educational psychologist. Do you want to read it out, Janet?
I didn't see that, Lydia. Is it down at the bottom?
No, it's about 4 or 5 up from the bottom. I think
just flowing in.
1258. That helps.
There we are. Thank you. Thanks, Callum. Is there any way to compel an LA to seek input from an educational psychologist, for example, an updated EP report during an annual review, transition review or otherwise, concerned that out-of-date EP advice is going to be considered during the review, and this will lead to a plan that I am so sorry, I've just lost the last part of your message.
That remains deficient and which requires an appeal. You can't really compel them to get advice. They should be looking at the EHCP at annual reviews and thinking, do we need updated advice? Is the plan out of date? Because a lot of plans do end up out of date because you go years and years and then the EP saw the child when they were 3 and now they're 11 and you go, well, this clearly is out of date. You could get an EP yourself. You could instruct one, which does cost money, but it would happen. Or you could put it to the LA and say, rather than me spending my own money, I want you to get an EP to do an updated report because the plan needs it. That needs may have changed, whatever it is. Otherwise, there is an alternative that you get an EP. But the thing actually with that is, where it says it may go to an appeal, often local authorities who haven't got experts involved for an annual review and then parents appeal, often you find out they then come and go, oh, we've got our experts that are going to come and assess now. And you think, if you just done that when we asked you to at the review, we might have saved some of this. But I suppose from our experience, often LA expert reports are not as necessarily thorough as independent ones. So you can see a difference. So sometimes it's worth spending that money just to get a bit more detail in there for your plan going forward.
Can you, Lydia, because I mean, first of all, is it general knowledge that families can ask for an EP? Do people generally know that they can do that themselves?
I think some parents probably know it more than others, and it depends what local authorities say or don't say. Because ultimately the duty is on the local authority to make sure the plan is maintained, accurate, up to date. But parents, it's a bit like when you have the initial EHC needs assessment, local authority gets advice from experts, but there's also an option there for parents to say, well, we want these people because this is reasonable based on our child's needs. So you can kind of start off the process with that. But yeah, there's no reason why going forward parents should think we can't ask for it, because of course you can. If you feel that the plan needs it, or you're not happy with the quality of what the existing reports say, or they're out of date, then yeah, parents are entitled to do that. But of course the cost will fall on them. Local authority wouldn't cover that.
Does it oh sorry so I'll just come back with Callum has just replied just to say thanks very much. The LA have already been asked and have refused to push referral. Some useful pointers and alternative options to consider. So
yeah, it's a shame that parents do often have to spend a lot of money on experts when you go back to the point of, well, local authority, you have a duty to do this, you should have just done it. I mean, worse, you could try. You could say, look, we have pushed for you that we wanted you to, you gave us no choice, but we had to incur these costs. You could try with that and say, we will come back to you later, recoup our costs. Whether you would be able to or not, I don't know. But there's no reason why you couldn't push with that a little bit to say, look, we wanted you to do this. You should be doing this. We had to incur our own money. I think it's different if you've got an LA expert already assessing, and then parents, in addition, want to get one as well. I think that's slightly different than the LA just not doing it, or saying you don't meet the threshold, or whatever wording they use. So yeah, it's a tricky one. It can be a tricky one.
And it's frustrating, isn't it? It's hard enough to start this process.
Yeah.
To then have to add to your difficult journey.
Yeah, and we're finding with EPs, there's some which we go to regularly, and we know them and they know us and they know what EHCP processes are like, but they get booked up so quickly, and we have parents come to us saying we're trying to book up EPs and they're booked up for months, and go, yeah, we're finding that too. There's not enough of them out there, and then they book up months in advance sometimes, depending on what you need them for. So yeah.
There is a couple of other two, and I can fit them in. They're quite long, so please bear with me. Understand my accent. So this is Sam. Hi, Sam. Being the EHCP coordinator at an SEN SLD school, the LA's usual response is the EP team have no capacity to get involved with annual reviews unless there is evidence of change in needs. We get allocated 2 half days, per term for an allocated EP to come into school, and we can use them as we need, usually to observe Pacific students. Again, just bear with me. The contributions are often not particularly detailed, and parents do feel a little bit let down by what is written.
Yeah. Oh, that's difficult, isn't it? But yeah. There's not really, this is often when parents feel like they do have to instruct their own experts, because it's like this, where there's just the time's not there, and the kind of I guess the kind of the focus doesn't feel like it's there for that each individual child, which is a shame. But yeah, you can only do what you can do, I think. You do with the resources you've got. So
yeah. And just also in response to that, Jessica, is I think it is worth noting that the LA experts are not impartial. They work for the LA, and therefore any recommendations that they make have an implicit funding angle within the recommendations. In our experience, the private reports have always been far superior and impartial, though an expense. So that's what you said, really.
Yes, I suppose local authority will, if it's not being said, in a report, obviously, ultimately it's going to come, local authorities will be funding what's in an EHCP. So it's a factor. I think the point about just the quality of the reports, yes, I think you can get local authority reports and they're a couple of pages long and they're very woolly, and I think that's the thing that's most, the thing that often parents do need from expert reports who are independent is the level of detail about the provision. Because what often we find is if you get an LA EP who, yes, they're working for the LA, they're not, that can't be changed, so that. But then you get their recommendations and it's, kind of frequent opportunities for this, that, the other, and a high level of adult support and all these things that you can't pin down to an actual what it translates to. But then we find that they get quite often copied and pasted or nearest to it into EHCPs, and then parents go, well, this doesn't help anything, it doesn't help school, this is what does this actually mean? And you look back at the reports and you go, well, that's just all been taken. Sometimes you even see it where it's written in first person from the EP's, I witnessed this, and I think, well, you haven't even taken that out. And you get these bits where clearly it's just been put in because that's it. And often we look at it and we go, right, that's too vague, that's too, that doesn't make sense, how many of those sessions, for how long. So that's often when, independent experts, they would just, they know what they're doing. Oh, someone's come off mute again. If they know what they're doing and their experience with the EHCPs and what to write in reports for tribunals, they will set out what you need to put in, and then you've got a nice comparison to go, right, this is exactly what the child needs, in kind of plain English, in something that you can make sense of. So
There was just one last thing. I think, Janine, it's pretty much what Lydia had said, is that's worth trying, but are there any cases you're aware of where the LEA have agreed to reimburse parental costs incurred if the LEA accepts the privately funded assessments to inform the EHCP?
I can't think of any where parents have put that to the LA and the LA's agreed off the top of my head. It doesn't mean it hasn't happened, but I'd be surprised if it does happen more often than it doesn't, just because, especially if the LA, even if they accept the privately funded assessments to form the plan, that's not a given that they'll say, well, we will cover the costs, because especially if they've got their own experts involved and they've already done the reports and parents have gone, we want to get our own in too, which parents can do, the LA probably in that instance would be saying, well, we did it, it's up to you that you didn't like them or not, we're not going to pay just because you chose to get experts in at your own cost. But it doesn't mean it may not happen if you're in a situation where, say, the LA just can't find an EP. There isn't one available. They just can't find one, and parents go, "Oh, we can get one, but they're going to cost this much to do it." You could try that and say, "Look, this was the only option, so the duty falls on you. Why should we, or we pay the difference between what the LA EP rate might be and the independent one?" Sometimes things like that often happen where, if you've got provision in a plan and parents want a specific therapist to do the provision, like say speech therapy, and say LA may say, well, we've got someone who meets the criteria, who can do it. Parents may say, well, we've actually got someone who's already been working with the child and knows them, we want them. If the independent one is more, per hour, then LA may agree, but may say to parents, well, you pay the difference from what ours would have been, because that's their duty, is just what's you know, suitable. It's not what's best and preferred. That's, if there's anything extra, that's on parents to fund. Yeah, but it doesn't mean you can't ask it. Depends on the circumstances, I think. So it's tricky.
You guys, I think we will have to sort of wind up quite soon, but there's just one comment from what you've made, and there's another question from David. Can you pop them in? Thank you. Sam says, parents often request a reassessment of the child's needs, which is an incredibly lengthy process, but gets the EP to do an assessment. So it's...
Yeah, reassessment sometimes does happen if it's been a long time since.
Okay.
Yeah, since full assessments happened. So
okay. Post 16, we have an offer. We have an offer of a conditional place at college, conditional offer dependent on updated EHCP from Buckingham County Council. Had transition review October last year, 2021. No update as yet. How do I find out stage of our EHCP from LA?
So you should be contacting the LA and saying that they should have issued that decision within 4 weeks of the review. So you're well over that, and stress to them that you're going to have a deadline coming up at the end of March. You need that decision before then, so you can appeal if you need to. So yeah, follow up in writing. It's something we can help with as well if you wanted us to. So if you want to have a chat, then obviously you can contact me. That's fine.
Okay. Because questions are still coming in, but I do have, somebody has said, gosh, our daughter's at the same as above. She has a conditional offer from a residential college. So I'm guessing that's the same advice as to follow up with that.
Follow up in writing. If you give a timescale for them to respond. If they don't, we're not quite sure, seek advice sooner rather than later, I'd always say.
Great. And just one more, thank you, Rochelle. If the LA requests an independent therapist to provide provision, and as part of that agreement, the independent therapist completes their assessment, are they permitted to change the plan, even if it is not the time for annual review? Or does the independent therapist need to wait for the annual review to make changes?
So it's only the LA who could elect to make changes in the EHCP. They could also do that outside of an annual review if they felt it was necessary. You couldn't get an independent therapist saying, I want to make these changes. They could put forward changes and say, I'd like you to consider these, LA, because whatever it is. LA may not make them, or they may wait to an annual review before they consider them. It depends what the changes are. If it's something really significant, like a change in need, something drastic, then they may look at it. But it would be on the LA whether they want to look at any changes then or wait for a review. And they still may not make the changes at the review, so you'd have to appeal if they didn't. Is that all of them?
I think so, but I think Jackie's just put Lydia's details up there. So please, do send any more inquiries and questions to Lydia.
Yes.
And she will do her very best to reply and get back to you. Okay.
Well, there's some really interesting questions in there, so thank you to people.
It's a minefield. It's a minefield.
I think it does just reflect kind of how complex this all is, for parents and everything. So, Lydia, thank you very much. Obviously for all of that information, and there will be a fact sheet that goes with this recording. Sometime in about the next week. That we'll put together, and we will upload this recording onto the website as well with the fact sheet, and we'll put as much as we can. We'll look at the other questions and sort of put as much information as we can. But some of those questions, I imagine, are very sort of individual, and we would need to know an awful lot of background to really be able to give a sort of a clear answer. Yes. So if we couldn't address all of those. So thank you so much, Lydia. That was, as usual, very interesting.
Oh, Lydia.
There's loads of information in there. So, and thank you everybody for joining. So we had a nice full kind of Zoom room today, and I'm sure we will be having some more webinars with Lydia. Putting her on the spot there, but
I'm sure.
They are always very popular, and I think that does reflect just how much information people need around EHCPs, because they are complex, and of course everything varies according to a local authority as well, and their interpretations and all those sorts of things. So not so straightforward, but things like this I think are very helpful. So we will say goodbye to everybody now, and yeah, thank you again for joining us, everybody who is watching, and we hope that was useful for you. And yeah, we'll have your email, and we'll send you out a link when it's live on the website, and we'll have the fact sheet as well, so you'll have that on the and we hope we'll see you again for further webinars throughout the year.
Yeah, please join us. Bye, guys.
Lovely, thanks. Bye-bye.
Bye.